There's a strange, silent despair flowing through modern life, an emptiness we can't quite name. We scroll endlessly, surrounded by voices, faces, opinions, and yet we've never felt more alone. The more connected we become, the more spiritually malnourished we feel. It's as if something essential to being human is slowly eroding, and we can sense it, but can't quite grasp what is slipping away. Aldous Huxley warned of a future where truth would drown in a sea of irrelevance, where people wouldn't need to be controlled by force because they would be seduced by distraction. Unlike Orwell's brutal dystopia of overt oppression, Huxley envisioned a world where we willingly surrender our minds, losing ourselves not through fear, but through pleasure, novelty, noise. Today, that world is not science fiction. It's our daily routine. Psychologists note a sharp rise in anxiety, depression, and loneliness, paradoxically in the very era of constant interaction. Nietzsche once said that the greatest danger is not that we will perish, but that we will never truly live. This is the paradox of our time. We are alive, but barely awake, surrounded by information, but starved of wisdom, surrounded by people, but forgotten by ourselves. In this video, we will explore 6 profound insights, psychological and philosophical, that help us understand why social media is quietly dehumanizing us, and more importantly, how to reclaim our inner life before it's too late. We'll draw from thinkers like Huxley, Nietzsche, Jung, and more, not as academic references, but as living guides who foresaw the spiritual cost of a distracted civilization. If you've ever felt that something sacred within you is being eroded with every scroll, you are not crazy. You are waking up. It begins subtly. You wake up, and before even feeling the weight of the morning air, your thumb is already scrolling. 100 images flood your mind before your feet touch the floor. You haven't spoken a word, reflected on a single thought, or looked out the window, and yet you've consumed more stimuli in 5 minutes than your ancestors might have encountered in an entire day. The philosopher Aldous Huxley warned of a world where people would be reduced to passive recipients of pleasure, a society not forced into submission, but lulled into apathy. And that's precisely how stimulation operates. It gives the sensation of aliveness without the substance of meaning. Modern psychology tells us that every like, every notification, every swipe triggers a small release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward. It feels like tiny sparks of joy, but these sparks do not create warmth. They create dependence. Instead of pursuing something meaningful, we become addicted to the quick hit of novelty. We start confusing excitement with purpose. There was once a time when boredom led to creativity, when silence led to introspection, when the absence of stimulation forced us to dive deeper into the well of imagination and idea. Now, the moment discomfort arises, we escape through a screen. We never allow ourselves to feel the sacred agitation that precedes insight. As a result, we remain intellectually restless, but spiritually stagnant. A young woman once told me, "I spend hours online every day. It feels like I'm living, but when I close the app, it's like nothing stayed with me. I feel empty." That emptiness is not a flaw in her. It's the intended design. The goal of endless scrolling is not to nourish you, it's to keep you craving. Huxley believed that people would come to adore the technologies that undo their capacity to think. He wasn't condemning pleasure itself, He was warning us about shallow pleasure that masquerades as life, meaning, unlike stimulation, requires effort. It often arrives slowly, through discomfort, through stillness, through the hard work of paying attention. But once it arrives, it doesn't vanish when the screen turns off. It sinks deeper. It expands us. This is the tragic misunderstanding of our time. We chase stimulation, believing it will fill the void, but stimulation is the void. It gives motion without direction, noise without wisdom, light without warmth. So we must ask, when was the last time you allowed yourself to be truly bored? When was the last time you sat in silence long enough to hear your own mind speak? We have forgotten how to feel life directly. We are alive, yes, but often only through the flicker of someone else's timeline. There's a phrase I return to often: not everything that feels good is good for you, and not everything that's good for you feels good, meaning isn't always pleasurable, especially at first. It requires discipline, focus, and patience. But unlike stimulation, meaning leaves an imprint on the soul. Huxley's fear was not that we would be oppressed, but that we would become so entertained we'd stop seeking anything greater. And in many ways, that prophecy has come true. But prophecy is not destiny. We can still reclaim our attention, not by rejecting pleasure, but by distinguishing between what sparks momentary excitement and what nurtures lasting significance. As you move through today, notice the impulse to reach for your phone every time there is a quiet moment. Instead of numbing that space, try honoring it. Ask, what am I really looking for right now? Stimulation or meaning? There's a moment that many of us will recognize but rarely admit. You're about to post something, a photo, a thought, a moment from your life. But before sharing it, you pause, not to reflect on its truth or meaning, but to edit. You adjust the lighting. You remove the messy background. You curate the caption so it sounds deep, clever, desirable. In that split second, a transformation occurs. Your life becomes content, and you, without realizing, become a brand. Michel Foucault wrote about the idea of the panopticon, a metaphorical prison in which people begin policing themselves because they feel constantly observed. Today, social media has become a digital panopticon. We perform not just for others, but for an imagined audience in our head. How will they see me? Will they approve? Will I appear successful, attractive, enlightened? Jung would call this the inflation of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. But what happens when the mask becomes more real to us than the face beneath it? We spend hours polishing our online identity, but rarely spend 10 minutes sitting with our actual soul. We know how to appear authentic, but we are terrified of being real, because being real might not get likes. So we polish, filter, refine. The tragedy isn't just that we lie to others. The tragedy is that over time, we become the lie. We look in the mirror and no longer know if we're seeing ourselves or our brand. A young man once told me, "I feel like a product I'm constantly improving, but I don't feel like a person anymore." That sentence stayed with me because it captures the spiritual cost of living for applause. When life becomes a performance, we lose the capacity for genuine presence. Every moment becomes a potential post. Every emotion becomes a polished caption. Even grief becomes performative, staged in aesthetically pleasing melancholia. Foucault believed that modern society doesn't need to imprison people physically. It just needs to make them internalize the gaze of others. And so we become our own wardens. We censor ourselves. We silence parts of our soul that don't fit the brand. Over time, the inner life shrinks. Carl Jung warned that an overdeveloped persona leads to neurosis. He wrote, "The persona is only a mask of the collective psyche. When we invest all our energy in that mask, the deeper, truer self withers, and yet the soul doesn't die quietly. It rebels. It shows up as anxiety, restlessness, a sense of fraudulence. We may have a beautiful profile, but a hollow center. Ask yourself, when was the last time you shared something not to impress, but simply to express? When was the last time you allowed someone to see the unedited version of you, the one with doubts, contradictions, softness, uncertainty? That is where connection happens, in the unfiltered spaces where the soul can breathe. The irony is that the more curated we become, the less we actually feel seen. We gain visibility, yes, but lose intimacy. Our audience grows, but our friendships thin. We become known by many, but truly known by no one. At some point, we must ask, is it better to be admired or to be understood? Remember, a brand must always be consistent, but a human being is allowed to evolve, contradict, question, fall apart, rebuild. Real life is messy, but in that messiness lies truth. So perhaps the invitation is not to reject all social media, but to reclaim our humanity within it, to share moments, not for validation, but for connection, to let go of performance long enough to remember who we are without the applause. Picture this. You open a social media app just for a minute. An hour later, you've gone from laughing at a meme to watching a violent clip to feeling strangely outraged at something that doesn't even affect your real life. You close the app feeling drained, irritated, maybe even anxious, but you didn't decide to feel that way. Something else decided for you. The algorithm is not evil in some cartoonish sense. It's not a villain with a face. It's simply optimized, ruthlessly, to keep your attention. And the easiest way to keep a human hooked is not through calm reflection or reasoned dialogue. It's through the oldest parts of the brain: fear, desire, outrage, tribalism. Freud called this the ID, the primitive impulses of aggression, lust, immediate gratification. Evolutionary psychologists would call it survival wiring. Whatever the term, one thing is clear. Social media doesn't appeal to the rational adult in us. It hijacks the ancient, reactive animal. This is why the most inflammatory content spreads fastest. Anger travels quicker than nuance. Outrage feels urgent, and urgency keeps you scrolling. The algorithm learns, if I show you something that triggers fear or rage, you stay longer, not because it's true, but because it's effective. Truth becomes irrelevant. Engagement becomes God. One man told me, I don't even know why I'm angry all the time. I open Twitter and feel like the world is falling apart. But then I walk outside and it's calm. That confusion, the gap between reality and perception, is the algorithm's invisible handiwork. It's not showing you the world. It's showing you whatever makes you react. Freud believed that civilization is a constant struggle to contain our primitive impulses. Society teaches us to restrain, reflect, act with conscience. But online, those restraints dissolve. We regress to tribal thinking, us versus them, friend versus enemy, nuance versus oversimplification. We feel morally righteous, but underneath is often something more primal, a desire to dominate, to belong to a tribe, to feel superior. These platforms are not passive mirrors. They are active manipulators. They curate reality in a way that preys on your psychological vulnerabilities. And the scariest part? It works even when you know it's happening. Awareness doesn't fully protect you. Just as casinos use lights and sounds to keep gamblers entranced, social media uses emotional triggers to keep us scrolling. But where gambling costs money, scrolling costs something deeper: attention, clarity, peace. So what can we do? We can begin by noticing the moment our emotions spike, the outrage, the sudden insecurity. Ask, is this how I truly feel? Or is this feeling being manufactured? That moment of awareness is a small act of rebellion. It's you reclaiming your sovereignty. Technology itself is not the enemy. The problem is when technology is designed to exploit the weakest parts of us. We do not need to become monks or abandon the online world entirely, but we do need to become conscious participants, not unconscious prey. There's an old saying, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. But I'd go further. You're not just the product. Your primal instincts are the fuel. And unless we learn to interrupt the cycle, the algorithm will continue to shape not just our habits, but our character. So the question is not, how do I use social media less? The deeper question is, how do I remain human, thoughtful, self-aware, free, in an environment designed to keep me reactive, primitive, addicted? That question alone can begin to pull us out of the trance. There's a quiet, unsettling truth beneath every scroll, click and tap. Your attention is being harvested, not accidentally, but intentionally, and for profit. Karl Marx argued that in capitalism, human labor becomes commodified, sold and traded like any other product. But in the digital economy, something even more intimate is being commodified: our consciousness. Our attention has become a resource mined, measured, and sold. We're not just users. We are raw material. Think about it. These platforms don't charge us money because our time and attention are far more valuable to them. Every moment you stay engaged becomes data. Every hesitation becomes a metric. You are not the customer. You are the resource being extracted. In the language of surveillance capitalism, you have become behavioral surplus, data to be sold to advertisers and political campaigns. This isn't passive, it's orchestrated. Infinite scrolls, autoplay videos, push notifications, all designed to keep you tethered, not for your growth, but for their revenue. The longer you stay, the more ads they can show, the more data they collect, the more predictable you become. In a strange way, they know your impulses better than you do. Aldous Huxley feared that human beings would gladly trade freedom for comfort, and that's what we've done. We've traded our attention for convenience, amusement, distraction, but that trade is not neutral. It comes at the cost of depth, focus, and presence. One man told me, I feel like I can't focus on a book anymore. My mind wanders every few seconds. That's not a personal failure. That's the effect of attention extraction. When your mind is conditioned to flicker from one stimulus to another, deep concentration begins to feel uncomfortable. It's not that books became harder. It's that our attention spans were monetized and fractured. Marx believed that alienation occurs when people become disconnected from the products of their labor and from each other. Today, We are alienated not just from one another, but from our own inner life. We are so busy consuming content that we forget to produce meaning. We become spectators of our own existence. When attention becomes currency, silence becomes resistance. When you choose to focus deeply, to read, to meditate, to be with someone without your phone, you are disrupting $1 billion industry. In a world where everyone wants a piece of your mind, reclaiming your attention is an act of sovereignty. So what now? We cannot escape the system entirely, but we can become conscious of it. We can notice how we are being shaped and choose to step outside that conditioning. We can protect our attention the way we protect our money, our health, our loved ones, because attention shapes desire, and desire shapes destiny. Ask yourself, what am I giving my attention to? Who benefits from me being distracted? And what kind of life could I build if I treated my attention as sacred? Huxley's warning was not just about distraction. It was about the cost of forgetting what it means to be fully conscious, alive, and free. The platforms we use are not merely tools. They are environments, and environments shape who we become. So perhaps the first step toward freedom is not deleting every app, but realizing that your attention is not disposable. It is life force, and the more you protect it, the more human you remain. There's a strange, haunting moment that many of us have experienced, though rarely confessed. You post something, and for a moment, you receive a flood of likes, comments, little heart icons. You feel noticed, affirmed, visible. But when the screen goes dark, a deeper feeling surfaces, a quiet ache, a sense of being unseen in a more fundamental way. It's as if being looked at is not the same as being known, and in that gap lies a very modern form of loneliness. Nietzsche once wrote that the individual must fight to avoid being swallowed by the crowd, that the opinions of many can drown the truth of one's soul. Kierkegaard called it the despair of the aesthetic life, a life devoted to appearances, stimulation, admiration, but devoid of inwardness. Today, that despair is camouflaged behind filters and comments. We are visible to many, but intimate with few. The problem is not that we want to be seen. That's a human need. The problem is that we've begun to worship visibility as if it were love. We chase metrics, followers, impressions, relevance. But those numbers don't hug you when you're grieving. They don't stay up late to hear the tremble in your voice. They don't know you. They only react. I once spoke to a young creator with hundreds of thousands of followers. He said, "The more people follow me, the lonelier I feel. They see the version of me I present, but no one actually knows who I am." That's not failure. That is the nature of visibility. It spotlights your image, not your essence. Real connection requires vulnerability, the willingness to be seen in your uncertainty, your contradictions. But algorithms reward certainty, sharp opinions, curated perfection. So we learn to share not what is true, but what is effective. We become performers on a stage of strangers, applauded yet untouched. Nietzsche warned against becoming a performer for the crowd, because the crowd does not care about your soul, only your spectacle. Kierkegaard believed that the crowd is untruth, that truth resides in the single individual, the inner life. Yet our age reduces the individual to a profile, a collection of highlights, opinions, and aesthetics. Think of how we say we're checking in on someone, but really, we're checking their posts, not their heart. Visibility masquerades as intimacy, but intimacy requires time, presence, silence, care. It cannot be quantified. So what do? We can begin by reclaiming the courage to be known, not just seen. That might mean fewer posts and more conversations, fewer performances and more presence. It might mean being imperfect in public and allowing someone, even just one person, to witness the raw, unbranded self. Ask yourself, do I want to be recognized or do I want to be understood? They are not the same. Recognition can fill a moment. Understanding can heal a soul. Nietzsche said that those who truly love life seek depth, not applause. Kierkegaard believed that the greatest truth is found in inwardness. Perhaps the antidote to digital loneliness is not to disappear, but to let ourselves be seen beyond the optics, to share stories not for claps, but for communion. Because in the end, a single genuine connection nourishes more than 1,000 empty reactions. Imagine this. You're faced with a dilemma, a moment of uncertainty. Instead of sitting with the question, you immediately type it into a search bar. What should I do if, or is it normal to feel? Within seconds, you have answers, opinions, step-by-step instructions. But whose thoughts are you living by? Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." It wasn't a condemnation. It was a warning. Without self-inquiry, we become vessels for other people's definitions of truth. Today, we've streamlined that process. Why wrestle with questions when 1,000 opinions await you online? Why develop inner wisdom when algorithms can package it for you? But here's the subtle danger. Each time we outsource our thinking, we weaken the muscle of introspection. We become dependent on pre-digested answers. Slowly, the desire to question atrophies. We stop asking ourselves what we actually believe. We become passive consumers of meaning, scrolling through life like a feed. Albert Camus called this the problem of absurdity. Life has no inherent meaning except the meaning we create. But creation requires effort. It requires the courage to face the void and form something authentic. When we rely on external sources for every idea, we forget how to generate meaning internally. The result is not intentional living, it's existential emptiness. There's a quiet tragedy in being alive, yet never forming your own worldview. We might know trending opinions, but do we know ourselves? We may retweet clever quotes about life, but have we truly lived those truths? Wisdom cannot be outsourced. It must be born from within, often through struggle, silence, self-reflection. A student once told me, "Whenever I feel lost, I search for motivational videos instead of figuring out what I truly want." There's nothing wrong with guidance. We all need teachers, but guidance should lead us deeper into ourselves, not further away. At some point, we must sit alone with the question and listen to the quiet voice within, not the loudest voice online. Socrates didn't give people answers. He asked them questions. He forced them to think for themselves. Camus believed that rebellion, the act of saying no to mindless conformity, is the beginning of genuine existence. To think is to rebel. To reflect is to resist becoming a passive cog in the machinery of culture. In a world of instant information, thinking feels slow, inefficient, but it's in that slowness that real clarity emerges. Reflection is not a delay. It is the birthplace of insight. Without it, we may appear informed, but inwardly, we're empty. We react, but we don't understand. So what if you reclaimed thinking as a sacred act? What if before reaching for your phone, you ask yourself, what do I actually feel? What do I believe? What do I want this moment to mean? These questions can be uncomfortable, but they awaken something vital within us. The more we depend on external input to tell us who we are or how to think, the more we risk losing the will to live deeply, consciously, not because life loses meaning, but because we stop creating it. To live deeply requires discipline. The discipline to pause before reacting, to think before adopting an opinion, to question even the beliefs that feel convenient. That discipline is a form of freedom. Camus wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." In our digital age, perhaps the act of rebellion is something as simple and as difficult as thinking for yourself. We began with a disturbing paradox. We have never been more connected, and yet something essential in us is quietly dying. Aldous Huxley warned not of a future where we'd be enslaved by tyranny, but where we'd be seduced into surrendering ourselves through distraction, pleasure, and noise. Today, social media has become that very landscape, not merely a tool, but an environment that shapes our identity, our desires, our attention, and even our capacity to think. Throughout this journey, we explored 6 deep truths about what is happening to us. We've confused stimulation with meaning. Endless novelty gives the illusion of aliveness, but leaves us spiritually barren. We are becoming brands instead of human beings, trading authenticity for performance. The algorithm preys on our most primitive instincts, keeping us reactive and addicted. Attention has become currency, and without realizing it, we have been sold. We have mistaken visibility for connection, leaving us surrounded yet unseen. And perhaps, most devastating, we have outsourced our thinking, forgetting how to live an examined, consciously chosen life. But these realizations are not meant to make us despair. They are meant to wake us up. The fact that you are watching this, that you've stayed with these questions, means something in you is still alive, still searching. You are not extinct. You are awakening, and that matters more than you know. The task now is not to abandon technology, but to re-inhabit our humanity within it, to protect our attention as if it were sacred, to build connection that is intimate, not performative, to choose thoughtfulness over reaction, to trade noise for silence long enough to hear the deeper voice within. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are," but you cannot become who you are if you are always distracted from yourself. You cannot build a meaningful life if your inner world is constantly fragmented by screens that profit from your fragmentation. So I leave you with a question, a challenge. What would your days look like if your attention, your time, your inner life truly belonged to you again? Not to an algorithm, not to an audience, but to you, the thinking, feeling, sovereign being behind the screen. You are not a product. You are not a brand. You are not a series of reactions. You are a living soul with depth, longing, complexity. The world quietly needs more of that, not louder opinions or better content, but people who are deeply, fiercely awake. If this resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to a different way of living, one where each week we reflect together, slowly, honestly, like old friends searching for wisdom in a loud world. Share your reflections below. I do read them, and they remind me that we're not alone in this. Let's not go extinct as humans while still breathing. Let's reclaim what distraction tried to erase. Let's remember ourselves.